of course, on Mount of Olives. Yesterday, of course, as we visited, of course, the tomb, the actual qubur of the Sahaba. I did mention that, tomorrow, today, of course, it will be like on this part, looking towards the other side. And that's exactly what we see today. The lovely old city of Jerusalem, the walled city actually. The old city of Jerusalem is, of course, the term that became like popular for the city, describing the walled city. The term itself of Jerusalem actually, and we had different names for the city, describing the city. The walled city of today is actually the old city of Jerusalem, with a wall from the Ottomanist period, from the 16th century. Sulaiman the Magnificent, Sulaiman the Qanuni, the Magnificent, the Turk, of course, is the one who initiated the work of building a wall to surround the city of Jerusalem. When I say Jerusalem, I do not say the old city of Jerusalem, for there was the only Jerusalem that they knew at the time. Alright? So you simply built that wall, enclosing the holy sites within. So the wall itself, that dates back to that era of the 16th century, has been maintained and preserved in a very good shape. Though not of course, the first wall to, for Jerusalem, but it's definitely the latest version of the wall. And you can see that it's been preserved really in a good shape, enclosing the holy sites, and of course, and that's exactly what we have today as the old city. And the old city became the name of the city because, we could only imagine people with the old city of Jerusalem being like a highly dense kind of area. People who can afford to would simply, find an opportunity outside the city, outside the walls. So we ended up having, of course, neighborhoods like the Muslim neighborhood where your hotel is, the Jewish one, a neighborhood that lies a bit to the south, and that's exactly the case since the second half of the 19th century. So we started to have what we call the old city, in opposed to the new city, the modern city. Unfortunately, even the economics, unfortunately, has shifted from the old city outside. And we started to have, markets outside the old city of Jerusalem. The old city of Jerusalem, of course, of today is the marvelous one. We are talking about the hardcore of the city of Jerusalem. When we talk about, even in today's negotiation between the two sides, we talk about the old city of Jerusalem. As of course, as an example of such a thing, of course, that in the course of the negotiation between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the late 1980s, of course, and early 1990s, of course, Israel was willing to give up on the neighborhoods that surrounds the old city of Jerusalem, but not the old city. For the old city holds again the holy places. And let's not forget that when we talk about Jerusalem, Jerusalem is only famous because of faith. Otherwise, it's a really small, insignificant kind of a town. Nothing matters, of course, in the city apart from faith, and faith only. But you can see that because of that faith, a wall was built to surround the city. Of course, a natural protection was chosen carefully to work and to function actually as a protection for the city. If you look down, you'll see a valley. The valley that lies below, of course, surround the city from three sides. Not one, but three sides. This one, of course, will be the eastern side of the valley. And we have another one, of course, another section of the valley that lies, of course, to the west side, actually, of the walls. Both combining at one point to the south, forming what we call the natural protection, entirely needed, of course, in ancient times. Not anymore. But again, we're talking about a walled city that was like really reinforced, really powerful during some time. The city itself again became very important because of that matter, because of course of the faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to bestow on the city. The walls, as you can see, go all around the city. The walls, we do have, of course, a 4.5 kilometers long of walls. Hence, of course, the space within would be, of course, 1 square kilometer. And this square kilometer lies, of course, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish one. The Muslim quarter, if you look closely, you'll see that the Muslim quarter is the biggest, of course. The Muslim quarter that holds the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and of course the residential area of the Muslim quarter is the biggest. In terms of size as well as in population, we have approximately 35,000 inhabitants living in that particular section of the city. We also have the Christian quarter where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. Tomorrow we'll have a chance, of visiting that section as well. Inshallah, we'll get to the Christian quarter. Then, of course, we'll move to the Armenian quarter. Then, of course, to the Jewish quarter to see the Wailing Wall and what the Wailing Wall is all about. That's something for tomorrow in the course during, of course, the walking tour. What lies, of course, closer to us would be, of course, the tombs that I mentioned. I don't know how many, if you have been listening to me when I described, of course, the fact that when talking about the sanctity of Mount of Olives, it's not just an Islamic sanctity, for it does a matter for the other faiths, like the Judaism and Christianity alike. When it comes to Judaism, we talk about the area that's supposed to be like, according to their own narrative, supposed to receive the Messiah when he comes from the east. And this is the east. We are in the eastern side, of Jerusalem. And this is why, of course, according to their own understanding, tombs, were laid down. What you see around, of course, would be the massive, like really big kind of, cemetery that's been functioning since an early time. According to their own understanding and perception, of course, those who are buried on Mount of Olives are going to be the first to resurrect when the Messiah comes from the east. And of course, the Messiah will be bringing what? The redemption, of course, and salvation, for the Jewish people. That's according to the understanding. This is why we have plenty of tombs, and the cemetery itself that surround, of course, all of the Mount of Olives from this side, from both sides. So in terms of course Judaism, of course, we're talking about a huge cemetery that is still functioning. Of course, when I say still functioning, of course, it means, of course, that Jews, of course, especially after the 1967, kept on burying their dead, of course, in this particular cemetery. It's not the only cemetery, of course, the Jewish one in Jerusalem, but it's definitely the most significant one, religiously wise. Okay. Now, in terms, of course, of their tombs, so before I move to the, of course, to the Christian perspective, regarding the Mount of Olives, the tombs that you see all around, of course, do have certain, elements that can really be they really stand out, of course, especially when compared to other tombs, that we have, the Christian ones, of course, or the Muslim ones that we see, the ones that we saw yesterday. Like if you look down, of course, you'll see that the tombs, have small stones at top. Yeah, the stones are the Jewish way of saying that you are still being remembered. So when they come for a visit, of course, as a Christian, you usually bring, a flower, right? For a Jew, when he comes for to visit, his deceased, he usually put a stone on top, the structure of a tomb. And that's mainly a tradition, a custom, but it's hardly worldwide here. So these are all Jewish kind of cemetery that lies here. And this is why, of course, the other name of the city of Jerusalem actually is the necropolis. It is, of course, an ancient Greek name that means the city of dead. City of dead, because of the many tombs that the city has. Not just for Jews, but also, for Christians. So the necropolis is the city of dead that lies next, very close to the city of the living. And make no mistake, of course, we're talking about Mount of Olives. There was a kind of boundary for the state of Jerusalem. Remember, the state of Jerusalem expanding after the 19th century. And prior to that date, this area was actually out of the city, So if you live in Jerusalem, if you reach this point, you are exiting the city. You are no longer in Jerusalem. Today, of course, it's an integral side of Jerusalem, especially, the recent, with the recent history, of course, with the recent events, of the city of Jerusalem. It's a must stop, for all who wishes to come, of course, and pay Jerusalem a respect, or visit, or even discuss the issue of Jerusalem right from this point, especially when looking toward that side, especially when seeing, of course, the other side of the city. Speaking of which, looking ahead, of course, you'll see the big buildings over there. They are not part of the old Jerusalem. They are part of the modern side of Jerusalem, the Jewish side. And lies between us, the old city, of course, and that side is another section of the wall. So we are talking about a complete kind of wall that goes all around the city of Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem. So what we have inside, of course, is the four major quarters that comprises, the 50,000 inhabitants, of course, in this small kind of space. So again, we have the Kidron Valley. That's the name of this valley, the Kidron Valley. We have the Jewish cemetery around here, and we have the Muslim cemetery that lies along the walls. And Muslims from an ancient time started to bury their dead, along the walls. Again, to get the, of course, the mercy, of course, they get to understand that Jerusalem as a city, as a concept for us, the Muslims, it is going to be, of course, the location of this assembly. The day of the assembly, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to judge the people. So, anyone who dies, of course, being a Muslim, of course, you expect to be, of course, judged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you expect Allah, of course, you make a supplication for, a mercy. Hence, of course, the gate of mercy that I described yesterday, the double gate that we see over there. The same double gate that is perceived by the others as the gate, of the Messiah. The Golden Gate, as they call it. They refer to that gate as the Golden Gate. So if you ever come across the name the Golden Gate, they usually refer to the same double gate for us, the Gate of Mercy and the Gate of Repentance, next to the Muslim cemetery. Can you all see it over there? That's the one. So what lies, of course, on this side, of course, would be many, of course, it's not just the cemetery here, but it's also many of the Christian sites. And this area, in terms of like Christianity, is actually a very significant one. We talk about in the area, there was a kind of the path that Jesus Christ had used when coming to Jerusalem. He would be passing this area coming from, of course, the area for Jericho, Nazareth, then Jericho, of course, and then he would ascend to Jerusalem. And remember the word ascent. He was like spiritually ascending to Jerusalem. From here, of course, he would be, walking all the way to Jerusalem. So it was like a major spot when he would talk about, of course, the Christianity, of course, in this country. According to the, one story, during his last visit to Jerusalem, he walked down to the city of Jerusalem. He had, of course, the supper, the Last Supper. That's something for tomorrow, actually. But, the area itself, the location, presumably the Mount of Olives. He would walk down the area to that area, of course, to the southern side of the walls, where he would have that Last Supper with his disciples before being apprehended by the Romans to be tried and condemned to the cross according to the Christian narrative, right? But that's the main story. The area itself, is also very important because it's exactly, where Jesus Christ, according to the same narrative, ended his earthly life among his disciples from certain points that hopefully we'll manage to cover. That's it exactly here on Mount of Olives. Because again, we're talking about a higher place, right? It does, overlook the city, yet of course it's outside. So Jesus Christ, when ending his earthly life, according to your understanding, it happened around this area. Some concept that is actually shared, with the Muslims, in terms of the concept of the ascension, I mean. So of course, in terms of Christianity, that's the place. Overlooking, of course, today's Al-Aqsa Mosque, but according to them, it's of course the location, of course, of the two temples. I will elaborate more tomorrow when we get to the temple, of course, to the Wailing Wall area. But the same area is perceived, by all as a very important site. This is why when we, of course, yesterday when we toured the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, I talked about the Crusaders when coming to the country, freeing the country from the early Muslims, of course, they established their rule around this area. Their kingdom was actually established here, of course, in Jerusalem, and of course, on that area. The headquarters was there, of course, the church, the rock was turned into a church, So it became like a basic thing for them. However, at some point, they did move to the other side of the city where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. And I will mention that tomorrow, of course, as we walk, around that church, that particular church, of the Holy Sepulchre. So the area itself, without any question, is a very important site. Though poor in terms of in terms of what we call geopolitics, it's very poor. But when it comes to faith, it's like a super important, site. That's why, of course, all sides, all parties like the Israelis and the Palestinians do quarrel, between brackets, around that area. And of course, for the Palestinians, all of this Jerusalem that you see around, of course, has been part of the West Bank occupied territories. Of course, on the eve of the Israeli conquest. And prior to that date, of course, it was part of the Jordanian control area. The Jordanian control area. 1967, Six-Day War, as they call it, of course, all of the side became under the Israeli control. And all of Jerusalem today is under their sovereignty. And of course, the Israeli law is what prevails here. Not the Palestinians, certainly not the Jordanians. So it's the Israeli rule, of course, that is being, of course, imposed over the people here. And I'm talking not just about the Jews who live mainly on the predominant, side of Jerusalem, the west side, of course, or the Jewish side, but rather the east side as well. So this side of Jerusalem, which is east, we are in the east side of Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is another term, another political term that describes the side of Jerusalem that became under the Israeli control in 1967, the side that was under the Jordanian control prior to that date, but it's East Jerusalem, so as to differentiate this side from West Jerusalem. So we got East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. Again, both sides became under their control in 1967, when, of course, both sides of the city became what we call part of the unified eternal capital of the state of Israel. Eternal unified capital of the state of Israel, and that's the Declaration of Independence made by, of course, was the first Israeli Prime Minister, of course, David Ben-Gurion in 1947. But of course, there was a law, the law of Jerusalem. It was simply passed in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, they call it, of course, the law of Jerusalem, restating, of course, that's really reaffirming, of course, that statement. That is, of course, Jerusalem is never to be divided. Prior to the 1967, there was an actual wall, a physical kind of wall, probably similar to the wall that we're gonna see today, inshallah, when we go to Bethlehem area, a wall that used to cut in between the two sides of the city, leaving the old city Jerusalem, of course, together with this side, under the Jordanian control, while of course the other side would be under the Jewish control. Both sides, again, the wall was immediately erased after the 1967, keeping Jerusalem as one city now under the Israeli control. And this side, of course, of the city is actually what the Palestinians, want to have as their future capital. Today we hear about the Palestinian Authority now, of course, the Palestinian people, of course, who aspire to have that section of the city, as their future capital. How is that possible with what's going on today, of course, with the settlements, and the refugee issue, it's hard to tell. We're talking about a really problem, like a huge kind of problem, when it comes to the Palestinians' claim regarding the city. The city that holds within, of course, the holy sites for the Jews, of course, in the shape of the Wailing Wall, of course, the church itself, the church of the Holy Sepulchre, and certainly the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound area, which is again perceived by the Jews as the location of their so-called, temple, according to their own understanding. Now, when you talk about the city of Jerusalem itself, what lies around, of course, it would be what we call another term, would be the Great Jerusalem. For Jerusalem itself is expanding. Jerusalem is expanding. The Israeli authorities are investing a lot, of course, in the city, turning the city into like a major, like a mega multicultural kind of city, especially, of course, the old part of the city, just to make it like worthy for the Jewish people according to their own understanding. Just to let you know, we are going, of course, today to the West Bank area.